Are you gonna get free this time?
Welcome to our One Breath podcast, brought to you by Sri Ponya, which means beautiful healing. Here in Central Oregon, we are building pathways of healing, dignity, and belonging through community-based peer support. Our Youth in Progress program walks alongside young people as they navigate life's challenges, providing mentorship rooted in lived experience and real compassion. And for our neighbors returning home from incarceration, Brothers and Sisters in Progress offers reentry support that inspires hope, connection, and second chances. At Sri Ponya, we believe recovery is a community effort and that social enterprise, peer leadership, and heart-centered care can transform lives. One breath, one moment, one relationship at a time. If you believe in this work and want to help us continue offering these vital programs, please consider making a donation today. Your support fuels healing, strengthens families, and expands opportunity for some of our most resilient community members. Donation information is included in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and welcome to the One Breath podcast. Today's guest is Father John Deere. Father John is an internationally recognized voice and leader for peace and nonviolence, a priest, an activist, an author, and a Nobel Peace Prize nominee. He served for years as the director of the Fellowship of Reconciliation. And after 9/11 in 2001, he was a Red Cross coordinator of chaplains at the Family Assistance Center in New York, where he counseled thousands of relatives and rescue workers. John has traveled the war zones of the world. He's been arrested some 85 times for peace, led Nobel Peace Prize winners to Iraq, given thousands of lectures on peace across the U.S., and served as a pastor of several churches in New Mexico. He arranged on many occasions for Mother Teresa to speak to various governors to stop an impending execution, and helped draft Pope Francis's January 1st, 2017 World Day of Peace message on nonviolence. He is a co-founder of Campaign Nonviolence and the Nonviolent Cities. He's authored many books, which include The Beatitudes of Peace, They Will Inherit the Earth, The Nonviolent Life, Radical Prayers, Walking the Way, and many more. So today, let's welcome Father John Deere. We have as our guest on the One Breath podcast, Father John Deere, who has been a longtime peace activist. He is a Jesuit priest. He's walked with, he cut his teeth with some really radical people back during the Vietnam War and maybe even a bit before that. And he has been a proponent of peace and activism, and also hosts a podcast called The Nonviolent Jesus, in conjunction with running and founding the Beatitude Center, which is dedicated to the message of peace and the nonviolent Jesus and us learning nonviolence. So thank you for being here today, Father John. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to our listeners and people that have been following us for a while now.
It's my pleasure to be here.
But I wanted to start, your podcast, and I've been reading the Gospel of Peace, and I've listened to every episode of your podcast of the Nonviolent Jesus. And what I am struck by is there's such a contrast between the nonviolent Jesus that you speak of, the Jesus that showed up in the New Testament with all of his teachings of love and compassion, and then what we're seeing promoted as Jesus today in America, the American Jesus. I would really appreciate you spending some time commenting on how did we get to such a vast, different Jesus?
Well, thank you, Greg. And for me, it's a critical question, maybe the most important question, not just for the church, but the world. It's all understandable. In the first 3 centuries, if you were a follower of Jesus, you practiced total nonviolence like Gandhi and Dr. King, which meant you could not be a Roman citizen, which meant you did not think Caesar was God. In fact, you were saying, our guy's God. We do what he says, and he's nonviolent. And so when you were baptized, and you put, instead of the seal of the empire of Caesar on you, you got the seal of the nonviolent Jesus, you were pretty much beheaded by that afternoon. I mean, it was incredible. But we know that in around 315, the Roman Emperor Constantine said he was now a Christian, legalized this illegal underground movement, Christianity, and said you can all join the army. And by the way, why don't you throw out that Sermon on the Mount? And I got an idea, turn to our pagan scholar, Cicero, and he says violence is justifiable. Within 100 years of that, St. Augustine comes along and says the best way to love your enemies is to kill them. And then we've got monasteries, and monasteries start forming their own armies. We don't talk about this. By the Middle Ages, poor St. Francis and St. Clare, they're dealing with the Crusades, where the bishops and the cardinals are leading the battle. I mean, it's like out of Monty Python, the Book of Holy Armaments, and Lord, in thine mercy, smash the skulls of our enemies' babies. I mean, it's insane. And for Jesus. And then we get white racism, slavery, all run by Christians. Christian men not letting women vote or considering them equal until 100 years ago. Waging war. And now it's Christians who build all the nuclear weapons and are threatening the planet and, rushing ahead with fossil fuels. And I've researched that. I really think that's true. So we're in really bad shape, but it's understandable because we don't read the gospel and we're not following the Jesus of the gospels. I actually don't think we want him. But in a nutshell, the way I look at the churches in the U.S., I mean, they basically say, okay, the Bible is the word of God, so you can do whatever the Bible says. Well, we don't want the nonviolence of Jesus and taking up the cross and nonviolent resistance and loving the children of Gaza and Ukraine and enemies. So we go with Samuel or King David, anybody to kill anybody, and we justify our insanity. And I'm proposing that if you're a Christian, you follow only Jesus. And not even St. Paul. I'm not big on St. Paul. I'm not big on it's all the word of God. I'm not saying it's not, but it's the Jesus. We really want to do what the poor guy wants. Anyway, a big factor for me, Greg, and you've heard me say it, was when I was a kid, I read that Gandhi said that Jesus was the greatest person of nonviolence in the history of the world. And that blew my mind. And because I think Gandhi's pretty great. But wow. And then poor Gandhi went on to say, and the only people on the whole planet who don't know that Jesus was nonviolent are Christians. So I've been dedicating my life to trying to teach the nonviolence of Jesus and to say, if you want to be a Christian, if you claim to be a Christian, you have to be as nonviolent as Jesus. And that means universal love, universal compassion, universal peace, and total nonviolence. You can never hurt anyone ever again. You have to get rid of your guns. You can't support war. You can't bless the troops. You can't send your kids off to war. You can't build nuclear weapons, all of which Christians in the U.S. are doing. And we don't even support the United States. We don't support any nation because that's just idolatry. All of this is idolatry. No, our God is the God of peace and universal love that Jesus came to tell us about, and we follow him. And that means we have to be nonviolent. And the scandal of the Sermon on the Mount, which Gandhi said was the greatest teachings of nonviolence in history, is that there For the first time in history, Jesus commands, love your enemies, which to me is not only ends war, it ends the nation state system, but he says you do this because you are sons and daughters of the God who lets the sun rise on the good and the bad and the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. In other words, the scandal of Jesus is God is nonviolent. I think very few people believe that. You know, we want a little bit of violence. We want God to get them. And that's just not
exactly.
the way of Jesus. So we're in a, but the hope here, Greg, is that there's more happening now about nonviolence than any point in history. We're getting closer towards real conversion toward nonviolence, even as we're moving closer towards global destruction. And that gives me hope. And we've had the greatest people in history in the last 100 years, starting with Gandhi, Dorothy Day, Dr. King, the Berrigans, Thich Nhat Hanh, so many peacemakers and teachers of peace. And 2/3 of the human race are involved in bottom-up people power grassroots movements for nonviolent social change. It's a very hopeful time to be alive, even though it's such a scary time. So we all have to really renounce any trace of violence and just let it all go and stop doing what the country says and start really reading the Gospels. Read it. I call it from the hermeneutic of a Gandhian Kingian perspective of nonviolence, and then it begins to make sense. Things like that, Greg.
Explain hermeneutic. A lot of our listeners.
It's just it's a highfalutin word. I'm trying to impress you. Yeah, it just means perspective. And we all have a perspective. Everybody brings a perspective to everything. And if you say, well, I'm a devout Christian and I don't get involved in politics, you're completely ignorant about everybody has a perspective, where you're from, your race, your gender, your wealth, on and on and on, just being in the United States. Well, what I'm proposing is we take the perspective of Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King and Dorothy Day and Mother Teresa, these really mythic figures, St. Francis, and read the Gospels from their lens. And as you do, you realize Jesus is meticulously nonviolent and gentle, and he's passionate for justice for the poor. I always joke, he thinks he's Martin Luther King. He organizes the poor in Galilee and marches to Jerusalem in a grassroots movement of nonviolence. He's saying, I'm sending you like lambs into the midst of wolves. I mean, that's the most incredible teaching of nonviolence. And then when he gets there, he breaks down sobbing because everybody prefers war and violent resistance to the nonviolence of Jesus. And then he marches into the temple and engages in nonviolent civil disobedience and to disrupt the big business that's ripping off the poor. And if you do that, you're going to be arrested and tortured and killed. And that's what happens in a day or two. And just as they're coming to kill him, his own followers, who've heard all these magnificent teachings of love, and you've heard an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I say to you, offer no violent resistance to one who does evil. Peter picks up the sword to defend Jesus. And that's when Jesus says, put down the sword. Those are the last words of Jesus to the church. And the first time they really understood who he was. And they all ran away from him. Every single one in Mark. Now, that's us. We don't want this radical nonviolence. And Gandhi says Jesus goes to his death in perfect, meticulous nonviolence, forgiving the people who are killing him, faithful to God, universal love, and he comes back and he's still nonviolent, which is what amazes me. He's so gentle and loving and kind and says, okay, now you go and walk the road of nonviolence into the world of total violence and be a peacemaker and proclaim God's reign of universal love and peace.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, and let that resonate down through the centuries. Let that resonate down through the centuries. And it's
But we
when
refused. We
Jesus
didn't
did
do it.
come back.
We didn't do it. Very few people
Right,
did it.
right, right. However, what's occurring in the peace movement, and I go to, I turned 70 years old on October 18th during the last No Kings March, and we had 7 million people in the streets. Not one evidence of a violent act being perpetrated by those that were out expressing their desire for peace and compassion for the poor. And it was, so apparently that message, there's been a thread of it that is still in the culture today that is beginning to impact more and more of us.
Well, a lot of people are working to teach nonviolence and train nonviolence. There's more books about it than ever before. We've had this historic book by Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stefan called Why Civil Resistance Works, which studied every war and violent revolution from 1900 to 2006, and it proves where nonviolent resistance is used against tyranny and war, it is much more effective than violence. So turns out Jesus and Gandhi were right. But, as a Christian, I think there are lots of signs of hope. But first of all, if Jesus is violent, we don't need him. We're all experts in violence. I don't need Jesus. He's a nice guy, but if he's violent, forget it. If Gandhi is right, then we're really getting somewhere. And this is really good news and worth pursuing for the rest of our life. And if he's announcing that God is nonviolent, then this is really, really hopeful. And resurrection starts to make sense. And then you see how God would have to give us total free will to reject him and allow us to be violent because God's nature is total nonviolence. Everything begins to make sense. But I don't think we really want God. I think if you have money or weapons, or you're really taking to heart being American with its 10,000 nuclear weapons and war making, then you're saying to God, I don't need you. My security is in my money and my weapons. I'm good to go. I mean, you're nice and Jesus is nice, but it's not total surrender, total discipleship to God. And that's what I want. Then I want us to return to the holistic nonviolence of Gandhi and Martin Luther King and become saints again and peacemakers. And that means we got to stand up and say no to this culture and really point a whole new way, as Gandhi and Dr. King did, that the future is nonviolence as a way of life. Mystical nonviolence, active nonviolence, prophetic nonviolence, the whole shebang. The churches have to be training camps of nonviolence.
Yeah, how does that relate to, the folks that you've had, the people you've had on the podcast have been of our generation and then some, for the most part. There was a gentleman by the name of Shane Claiborne that you had interviewed that is a bit younger. What's occurring with the younger generations now? Are you seeing?
Well, I think there's a lot. I mean,
are you seeing the
we saw
younger
it on October
generation
18th.
being inspired?
Well, we saw
perfect.
a lot of young people out on the streets on October 18th. And, my podcast is brand new, and I just invited all my friends, and I know all the old timers in peace and justice work because I've just been around so long. I'm old now.
Yeah.
And so I'm making it all up as I go. And I wanted to hear people talk about the nonviolence of Jesus, even people, great church leaders like Richard Rohr and Joan Chittister, to celebrities like Martin Sheen and Joan Baez, to mythic activists like Bill McKibben or intellectuals like Cornel West. So I'm just beginning the podcast, but I think like the Black Lives Matter movement was a huge, huge event in U.S. history. with, we know, 28 million people participating in it, nearly all of it totally nonviolent, and most of it led by young people. It was way bigger than the civil rights movement. And the No Kings events this year have been bigger than ever before. So it's just a matter of organizing. Now, in terms of young people, like, I'm a huge fan of Greta Thunberg. You know, she's this force of nature. She's a Martin Luther King person about the environment and climate change, and her eloquence is so brilliant. And she mobilized, not me or anybody else, she mobilized millions and millions of young people to go on strike and not to go to school in protest of the way older people have treated the environment and not doing anything to end fossil fuels. She's just an amazing sign of hope. And there are a lot of Greta Thunbergs out there, especially concerned to fight racism and environmental destruction. And that gives me hope.
Yeah, continue to encourage us along that line, Father John, because, when we look at the state of affairs as it exists, it could be really discouraging. And you've gone through every type of political environment, religious environment, spiritual environment in the past 40 or 50 years. And you've maintained that hope and that vision of a reality in a world that even God would want to inhabit. And how have you done that?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I guess I'm not that bright, but you can be so discouraged and you can give up today and never do anything and be despairing and depressed and frightened and just sit and watch TV. And then you're doing exactly what the empire wants, what the culture of violence wants, what authoritarian president wants, which is nothing. And you're powerless. There's nothing you can do. So I really studied Gandhi and Dr. King early on. And I claim to have read everything they ever wrote or written about them. And, Dr. King's defined nonviolence as power. We have the power of God. The culture says you're powerless. There's nothing you can do. If we get together and organize, if we live total nonviolence, but organize it as a political methodology through bottom-up people power grassroots movements, as Gandhi showed getting the British to leave and Dr. King showed bringing down segregation, we have the power to change the world. We definitely have the power to disarm our country and the world. We just don't use it, and we go along believing we're powerless. I have tried not to do that. But from day one, when I was 20, I decided to go and meet all the saints, Greg. That's why I tell you, I'm just not that bright. And they were all like, well, you actually want to talk to me? So I went and met with Coretta Scott King and then just was friends with them, Daniel and Philip Berrigan. Mother Teresa I worked with and used to talk with on the phone regularly. I was 28 years old. That's crazy. And then Tutu and Thich Nhat Hanh. Well, they all told me a lot of things. And I made a decision early on to learn from their mistakes and to just stay the course. Their message to me was, we need you for the long haul. Anyone can come and go. But we need people who are going to be in this journey of active nonviolence for the rest of their lives. And I said, okay. And later I lived in El Salvador and I knew the 6 Jesuit priests who were brutally assassinated. I knew them well. And I've known many, many people killed in wars around the world. I've been in Iraq, Afghanistan, Palestine many times, all kinds of war zones. And I've been in jails a lot. I faced 20 years in prison. So you have to dig deep. And you find that you need more than America or politics or TV or the people that the TV are proposing are people you should listen to if you're going to survive in America. I chose Jesus, and by that I mean I really don't read St. Paul that much. I really read the Gospels every day just to get to, because he's completely different than any other human being, and we're supposed to be like him. listen to the teachings of my friends. Daniel Berrigan said to me as a kid, if you want to be hopeful, you have to do hopeful things, which was a beautiful teaching. In other words, keep getting involved in the movement. I spend a lot of time in meditation. It's a requirement now. Otherwise, then I think, oh, I've got to make a difference. I'm the one in charge. I'm in charge. I got to end this war today. No, God's in charge, and I'm just doing my little part. And then I'm free. But every day I have to relearn the lesson because I'm stuck in this all-consuming culture, which is all about results and success and ego and look at me. And that's all baloney. That's the opposite of love, That's selfishness. So community is also really important. I have a lot of friends, and I work at staying friends with them. I love your word there, and I'll end with this, vision. I'm a big believer in that. I think that's a big theme in the Gospels that we don't talk about. It says in John 9, in the Greek, well, in the English it says, Jesus walked by and saw a man born blind from birth. In the Greek it says, Jesus walked by and saw humanity born blind from birth. There's no vision.
Whoa.
He's the only one with vision.
Oh.
And I've written a lot about that. And he's saying we're all blind. I'm the light of the world that you can see. So what has happened now here in this time of nuclear threat and catastrophic climate change and permanent war and rising fascism, white supremacy, and authoritarianism is we're all going blind. And by that I mean there's complete loss of the imagination, especially in the churches. People can't imagine the nonviolence of Jesus. They can't imagine being nonviolent. They can't imagine not having nuclear weapons or world of war or corporate greed. Well, there's just nothing you can do. And part of our job is to claim the vision of Jesus. Now, I'm talking this way because I've always been a big student of the abolitionists. I think they're nuts, Greg. I don't know if you ever studied them. I mean, you read Frederick Douglass, William Lloyd Garrison appears in Rochester in 1820 and says, tonight, I'm not kidding you, this is what he said, tonight I'm announcing the abolition of slavery. And you're going to go, oh, what are you, crazy? And that's what he was told. There's nothing you can do. There's always been slavery. It's in the Bible, and St. Paul says it's all right. No. A new world is coming, he said. A new world of equality. And he lifted up a new vision of what it means to be human, that we're all equal. And it was because of the vision that they could build a movement. In England, they didn't need a civil war. Our job as visionaries of peace is harder than theirs. We have to say, today we're announcing the abolition of war and poverty and hunger and racism and nuclear weapons and gun violence and executions and fossil fuels. And everybody's going to say, well, that's impossible. And we're going, no. A new world of nonviolence is coming. The kingdom of God is at hand. And not only is it possible, it has to happen. Because our other option is we're doomed to our self-destructive violence. And friends, I always say this is the best thing worth living for, because you get to hang out with people like Joan Baez and Cornel West and Martin Sheen and Coretta Scott King. This is where the excitement is. This is where the action is. This is where the cool people are. And I would rather be with them at the bottom, apparently making no difference, but being used by God in ways that we can't understand for God's peace movement. It's God's movement. And that's the thing. Anyway, you better stop me there, Greg, or I'm going to start preaching.
No, man. We'll get you. I'll build the pulpit, brother. I'll build the pulpit.
You don't encourage me.
Your words and your heart in the matter, and that rekindling. I was. Went through the born again experience when I was like 17 years old and just filled with love and fire. And then I went the road of the prodigal. I I let that go. I made choices that took me into making money, alcoholism. I burned. My life became scorched earth. So I consider myself a prodigal. And what encourages me so much, Father John, is that as I'm coming home, that prodigal coming home, I'm not coming home to the house I left. Yeah, I'm not coming home to the prosperity gospel. I'm not coming home to anything other than this Jesus that came to teach us how to walk in love, compassion, care for one another, care for the planet. We live in a border town next to the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. And my native friends, when they pray and sing, they often end their prayer and song with all my relations. And when they say that, they mean the four-leggeds, the fish, the bird, the winged people. And we are all one, and we're connected. And walking in the path of the nonviolent Jesus, and me coming home to a house where the nonviolent Jesus is welcomed is like, oh my God, thank you. Thank you.
That's
And
beautiful. Yeah.
it's you and the cool people that are speaking and holding up the path of peace that I'm finding I want to hang out too.
Yeah. Yeah. So the focus, unlike when you were young, it sounded to me like it was about the church and being a born again in the church, or in my tradition, being in the Catholic Church. I'm going to Mass. So I'm not saying that anymore. And
Right.
Daniel Bergen and Dorothy Day would have said that 75 years ago. The focus is Jesus, discipleship to him. And by the way, the focus, therefore, is on God. It's God. And the problem is we've made the churches God. They've just become other idols. And then the problem with leadership in all the churches across the board, evangelicals, Catholics, everybody, is power and ego and money. And that's not it either. So I encourage you, that's why I keep saying, I always tell people, only read the Gospels for the next 30 years and get back to me. And read a little bit of them every
One of my
day.
young,
And try to get to know this nonviolent Jesus. And then you've got to go and be part of the movements, because he was building a movement, just like Dr. King. And there's 1,000 movements today, and that's how you're living your faith. You're practicing nonviolence to yourself and toward all people and all the creatures and Mother Earth. You're loving yourself and loving everyone. But then we step out the door and we work for justice for the poor. We work for an end to the wars, the abolition of nuclear weapons, the end of fossil fuels, for the disarmament of the world, and for a new nonviolent world, really, which is preparing for God to give us God's reign. It's God's. We don't deserve it. But, to me, I think we're addicted to violence, Greg. If you talked about alcohol, this is the ultimate addiction. I mean, you can drink or do drugs, but the ultimate addiction is to do violence. It's all violence. We're all hurting ourselves. And in the end, we're addicted to death as the human race. Building nuclear weapons? What are you, insane? That's insanity. And catastrophic climate change through our greed? That's insanity. So that's why we have to become sober people of nonviolence, return to our higher power of nonviolence, do our amends, all those 12-step things, but have a much bigger vision that, as you said, that we're all one. And that's the heart of nonviolence. Every human being on the planet is your very sister and brother. That's the core fundamental. Therefore, everyone's a child of God. We're all equal. Therefore, you can't be passive if one person is suffering or dying. And yet we're inflicting suffering and death on billions. So there's nothing passive here. It's active love pursuing the truth of our common unity. I define nonviolence, to use your phrase that we're all one, as remembering who I am. I'm a beloved child of God, and so are you, and so is everyone. And so I'm going to work at maintaining nonviolence. I'm not going to hurt anybody. Violence is forgetting. The minute I forget you're a human being, that you're a beloved of God, then I start dehumanizing you. And the next thing you know, you're marginalized, and then you're the enemy, and then I can kill you, or I can raid you and arrest you and ship you off to El Salvador.
Yeah, Mother Teresa says.
So remembering who we are and being nonviolent,
Yeah, Mother Teresa, I've heard her quoted saying that, our dilemma is that we've forgotten that we belong to each other.
Yeah, that's exactly it, what I'm saying.
So,
yeah. She was great fun, I used to call her on the phone the night before an execution, and I'd get her to agree to speak to the governor in some state who could grant clemency within the day before the execution. And she would agree. And then I'd call her back and get a statement from her. Well, can you imagine? So she saved 8 lives on death row. Because if you imagine you're the governor and you're going to be talking to Mother Teresa and you're going to go, no, I'm going to go ahead and kill these people. They couldn't do it. And the first time happened, I called her back. I said, what did you tell the governor of California? I said, do what Jesus would do. And I said to Mother Teresa, I blew up at Mother Teresa. I said, is that it? Did you tell him not to kill the guy? And she said, no, John, I told him to do what Jesus would do. I said, well, why didn't you tell him not to kill the guy? And of course, what she said was much more profound. And it hit the whole state of California because she didn't tell anybody. She wasn't saying. She didn't, in effect, take a side. She just said, do what Jesus would do. Well, Jesus wouldn't kill anybody. He wouldn't harm a flea. He didn't have a mean bone in his body. But she was a lot of fun, is what I'm trying to say, Greg. And I learned joy and peace from her and all these great people. Tutu was hilarious. And so was Daniel Berrigan. And Joan Baez says Martin Luther King is the funniest person she ever knew. And that makes sense to me because they're full of life.
Yeah, who
Dan told me when I was a
right.
kid, if you're going to spend your life resisting death, make sure you learn how to live life to the full. And I've tried to do that too, and that'll sustain you for the long haul.
Well, that's the amazing message of Jesus, is stepping into this way, is that the life comes and the joy comes even in the suffering. That the suffering isn't
especially it's there in the Sermon on the Mount, Greg. Jesus says he even teaches the emotions of nonviolence in the Sermon on the Mount. He says, whatever you do, don't cultivate anger. Well, we all love to be angry. And then he's saying over and over again, do not be afraid and don't worry and don't be anxious. Well, that's what everybody in the U.S. is going through. But he advocates 2 emotions that very few people are pursuing. And that's what I'm working on. Grief. Blessed are those who mourn. We're all grieving what's happening in the world. And then he says, and when they insult you and harass you because you're advocating for justice, rejoice and be glad. So we should all be rejoicing because we're in trouble working for justice and peace in the world. And that's what I saw with Tutu and Thich Nhat Hanh and the Berrigans and Mother Teresa. They were really happy campers, and they were under constant death threat, Greg. Tutu was under constant death threat, but he was ridiculously fun to be with. And so what do you do with that? He was a practitioner of the Sermon on the Mount, and he took the text seriously, and that's what I do. By the way, anger and fear and worry and anxiety are no fun, and they don't work. Grief leads to breaking open your heart into greater compassion and greater love and to action. And joy is just fabulous.
Yeah.
Have
Yeah.
we resolved
You know,
everything?
we're getting close, man. We're getting really close. I would love it. Maybe we can land the plane with you sharing. You teach about the antithesis of, you've heard it said to,
Hmm.
love your own people, but hate your enemy. And then the eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, and share with us what Gandhi had to say about that.
Well, I think those are the most neglected teachings in the gospel, in the Bible, in history. We will memorize any verse but that. And I really encourage people to go back and read the Sermon on the Mount. Gandhi read the Sermon on the Mount every morning and every evening for the last 45 years of his life. And he wasn't a Christian, but he was the greatest Christian who ever lived. And so there in the fifth and sixth antithesis are the climax of the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus says, "You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." And Gandhi said, "An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth just make the whole world blind and toothless." It's insane. Violence doesn't work. Violence in response to violence always leads to further violence. But what Jesus said next needs to be memorized. And I've memorized it, and I want to encourage all your listeners to memorize it. He said, "But I say to you," and this is the best translation from the Greek. All our translations are bad. It should be, "Offer no violent resistance to one who does evil." I'm going to say that again. Offer no violent resistance to one who does evil. Someone's going to do violence to you. You can't do violence back to them. You have to stand your ground, but you use creative nonviolence and trust in God and love the person and speak the truth till you wear down your opponent, even through suffering love. And Gandhi applies that to the whole world and gets the British to leave India nonviolently. That's why all this is possible. And then, of course, that's not even the climax. You have heard it said, "Love your countrymen and hate your enemies." But I say agape, absolute, unconditional, nonviolent love for the people being targeted by your nation state. So it's nation state language. It's not the neighbor you don't like or the boss you don't like or Trump. The people your country are killing. So Vietnam, Central America, Iraq, Afghanistan, Palestine, and now the whole world with our nuclear weapons. We go and side with the enemies of the United States because we love universally. And we do that because we are sons and daughters of the God of universal love. Well, it's the most spectacular teaching in human history. And that's how I tried to live my life. Have I made a difference? Absolutely not. Do I care? Actually, that's kind of in God's hands. But I am trying. And I want to keep trying. And I want all of us to keep trying. That's all we've been asked to do, is to try to follow Jesus as
Yeah.
best we can. And that means stepping out into the world, into the mess, as lambs into the midst of wolves. Total nonviolence, universal love, universal compassion, universal peace. And I think that's where God is. That's where the action is, and that's where the fun is.
Well, you put a whole new lens on walking in this life, and being a follower of
Why
Jesus.
not, man? This is where the action is.
For right on,
You
man.
should
That's
read Gandhi and Dr. King. The
I'm telling
stories
you.
from jail are so funny. Huh? Yeah.
Yeah, I have been. I
So I
have
hope
been.
everyone
That's
will
in
go
fact I
take to, huh?
Yeah. If you could recommend, well, let me recommend your book, The Gospel of Peace. Um, it's such a beautiful book. And then you've also written books on Daniel Berrigan, The Essential Writings of Daniel Berrigan, and then The Essential Writings of Gandhi. So those would be three John Deere books that I would suggest for sure.
The
And then
essentials. But I
everyone.
have 35 others.
I
And
know.
I'd
I'm going
love
to
it.
put those in the show notes.
The people can read about my books at johndeere.org and then find out about my ongoing work at beatitudecenter.org. And the podcast is free everywhere around the world every week. It's the Nonviolent Jesus podcast with all kinds of wonderful people. I have Andrew Young coming up. I'm very excited to talk with him. So thank you for having me, Greg, and maybe we can talk again someday if you want.
Father John, you've made my month, maybe my year. So I so appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, no,
To
it's the good news of the
to share
Nonviolent
with
Jesus.
me.
That's it.
That's it, man. I love it.
That's where it's
And
at,
then,
man.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Father John. And if you're
My
serious,
pleasure.
I will be reaching back out because I would love to continue this conversation. Beautiful.
We'll do it again someday, Greg. So all the best to you, okay?
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the One Breath Podcast. Every story we share is a reminder that healing is possible, community is powerful, and progress is something we build together. If today's conversation moved you, inspired you, or helped you understand our work a little more deeply, we invite you to support Sri Ponya and our programs, Youth in Progress and Brothers and Sisters in Progress. Your contribution, no matter the size, directly supports youth mentorship, reentry support, and recovery-focused social enterprise across Central Oregon. To learn more, get involved, or make a donation, visit us online and stay connected to this growing community of compassion. A donation link is included in the show notes. Until next time, take a moment, take a breath, and take good care of yourself and each other.